All right, good morning. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Appreciate you making the time to do this. I know that for some of you this is kind of a short notice. And also it was a short notice since I sent out the documents yesterday. So again, thank you very much for doing that. A couple of housekeeping notes. This will be recorded, so if you're someone who is not live today, but you're able to watch or listen to this later, it'll be recorded. It usually takes about 24 hours for it to become available. So expect that we will send an email out. It'll probably come from Mary Nell. Expect to send an email out Monday or Tuesday with the link to this webinar, so you can go back and watch it then if you wanted to or needed to, especially if you're someone who's not able to get on at this particular time. Also, during the webinar, we have everyone's phones muted just so we don't kind of have that feedback and that sort of type of thing. But if you have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to either get on the question and answer section or the chat and just type in a question that you may have. We'll also have a time at the very end that's kind of a question and answer session. So if you want to ask questions during the process or wait to the end and do that, you may. Also at the end, if you don't want to type it in, but you actually want to ask your question, then just put that in a chat or an email and just say you would like to ask your question, and we can unmute your phone from here, and then you could ask the question that way as well. One other thing I wanted to address before we get started, we will be sending out emails today. So part of what we're going to go through with this work plan is going to involve your budget as you're planning for next year. So one of the things that you're going to receive from us today, it'll actually probably go out this morning, it'll go out to all project directors and site coordinators, is a change in funding. It's actually an increase in funding that we're going to have for you. So there's two parts for it. The email will provide a lot more information and language, so I won't be real specific, but there's going to be two parts to it. One is you will have an increase in funding. Every site will have an increase in funding this year of $10,000, so that this is money that has to be spent by May 31st, with the target of those funds will be for sales funding and sales technology, and then funds that you have left over after the $10,000. First, it could be used for sales support, so if that was calculators or something like that, and then any additional money that you have on top of that after you make that purchase could be used for any other eligible spending that you needed to do during this grant year that supports Gear Up goals and objectives. There will also be an increase in your funding starting next year. This is for every single site, and that will be for the next 5 years of the grant. That will also be included in the email and details about that. But I think why you need to know that now is once you look at this work plan and you start to figure out what you're going to do next year, you need to know how much money you're going to work with. So you'll receive that in the email that goes out this morning. All right, let's just go ahead and get started. Our goals for today are to first provide a foundation for developing the Year 2 work plan and budget. We'll talk a little bit about some things that are new and different moving into Year 2 than has been for Year 1, some next steps for implementation, and then questions and answers at the end. I know, as several of us we've already talked, that part of what will be really different is this is the time frame that we will do work plan development from now to the end of the grant unless something changes. This is typically when we do it, that it will start usually mid to late February. We'll talk later in this webinar about timelines of when the rough draft is due and when the final version of your work plan is due, and that will be pretty consistent each year compared to the summer that we did last year. Also, you kind of have a year in your belt now, so you kind of know what to expect and how things work and the collaboration that you have and that sort of thing. The other thing I think that's just so different going into next year, I know a lot of us have talked about this and you've thought about it, is your students are going into high school next year. So some of you have had a high school and middle school. Some of you have had a high school and 2, 3, 4, 5 middle schools that you've been working with this year. So going forward, you will just be working with your high schools, which makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier when you're talking about the documents and your planning. All right. Everything that you're going to put into your work plan, that you're going to put into your school, your collaborative plan, we want to make sure that everything is aligned with Gear Up Tennessee goals and objectives. I'm going to take just a second to read these goals because you have and you're going to continue to see these same goals again and again in everything that we do for the duration of the grant. The first one is to increase the academic performance and preparation for post-secondary education for Gear Up students. The second one is to increase the rates of high school graduation and enrollment in post-secondary education for Gear Up students. And finally, the third goal is to increase Gear Up students and their families' knowledge of post-secondary education options, preparation, and financing. Next is the Gear Up Tennessee program overview is the objectives. These 8. I won't read through each 8 of these, but I think what is so important with these goals and objectives, so often you're in a position that you're asking yourself, is this something that I should do? Is this an activity? Is this a service that I should prioritize? Is this something that I should spend money on? And this is always the first place I would go to as you're asking yourself those questions. Is this something that is well aligned with Gear Up Tennessee goals and objectives? As you look at your priorities, as you look at the amount of time and money and resources that you have, where does it fit? Where does it meet with these Gear Up goals and objectives? The next thing that I would ask you to look at when you're putting together your services and your events and things like that, and you're looking at where you're going to spend your resources, is the Gear Up Tennessee framework that we've talked about so much last year that you look at regularly when you're putting together your maps, when you're putting things in Compass each month, then these R's. Rigor, reach higher, relevance, relationship, raise awareness, and reinforce action. Again, I'm not going to read these. I'm not going to go through them because we spent a lot of time on that. But at the same time, I don't want you to lose track of that. It's easy, I think, to get into the required services chart and just start thinking about what you can do and how you can do things and who you're going to talk to and what types of services you're going to have. But I would ask you to always go back to these 3 things, the goals, objectives, and this framework, to make sure it fits, to make sure it is well aligned with what we're trying to accomplish, and that it's not just that it fits, but it's the best way to use your time and your resources. The next thing I just want to touch on briefly is match. Match is critical to the success of Gear Up Tennessee, especially as we talk about sustainability, as you talk about being able to continue to do what we're doing each year. And we're going to address sustainability today, and it's something that we're going to talk about each year of this grant. But as you know, when it's going to be really critical is after these Gear Up funds are gone, that we want so much of what you've done, that college-going culture that you've shared, that it doesn't end when Gear Up funding does. That's one of our ultimate goals, and that is something that we've learned that we can't wait until the last year or 2 years of the grant to work on. It's something we're going to have to continue to think about each year. As you know, your match requirement this year has been 20%. So going into year 2, your match requirement will be 40%, and that will go up 20% each year of the grant until it reaches 100%. So then the last 2 years of the grant, the match requirement will be 100% of your award. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, that your awards are going to go up next year. And again, the why and the how that is itemized in the letter that we're sending you. But if you agree to the increase in the award, then there would also be an increase in your match each year going forward. That will not be the case with the $10,000 that you're getting this year for sales and technology and that sort of thing. That amount does not have to be matched, and that is put in the letter as well. All right, let us go ahead and dig into the work plan development. First, there's 4 different documents that are part of the work plan development. All of these are the ones that I sent out yesterday. They will be on our web page. Also, when we send out a link to this webinar next week, then those will be updated on the website, and she will send out the link to these that are on the website at that time, so you can pull them down that way or just from the attachments that I sent. And again, I apologize that the ones I sent last night, I sent you 2 of them. I sent a second time because I wanted to make sure that the collaborative work plan and the work plan development guide contained that sustainability plan that it did not in the first iteration that I sent you. So there's 4 documents here. First is the work plan development guide for year 2. That includes the instructions and guidance for completing your collaborative work plan. I think that this is one of the documents that is so often overlooked. Your collaborative plan, your school work plans are the ones, and we'll talk about them in a second, but those are the ones that actually have to be completed. Those are templates that you have to complete, and you have to turn back in and submit. So everybody spends some time working on that one. The required services chart, a lot of people kind of consider that their Bible. If I go into a site coordinator's office or a project director's office, they've usually got that one really handy. They've got it up on a bulletin board. They've got it on top of a shelf to where it's really accessible to them. It's something that they look at all the time. But what I've found is the work plan development guide is the one that a lot of times when people come back and ask me questions after the webinar or after we meet and talk about work plans for next year, often the answers to those questions are in the work plan development guide. The work plan development guide is where a lot of times it goes step by step of how to complete the collaborative plan, how to complete the work plan, how to complete the budget, what we're expecting in different places and things like that. So I would beg to spend some time on the work plan development guide too. It's the largest document of the 4, but it contains a lot of good guidance that I think you would appreciate. The required services chart has the minimum services required for students, family, and educators. It's divided up that way, and then the student and family section is divided by the R's. We'll cover that here in just a second. And it's the minimum grant implementation activities. This is the minimum grant activities is a combination of minimum requirements from the U.S. Department of Education, where TX receives its funding, and then we have blended with that minimum requirements from the Tennessee Higher Education Commission itself. Next is the collaborative work plan. This is the one where you update your contact information and collaborative contact information for schools and principals and things like that. New this year, that was not in your work plan last year over the summer when you completed it, is the sustainability plan. And then the collaborative work plan is what includes your budget for the entire collaborative. Finally, the 4th document is the school work plan. You will have one work plan for each high school that you're serving next year, and this is where you will write down very specifically and include the services that you will provide for the students, families, and educators that meet those requirements that are listed on the required services chart. The school work plan is where you may also choose to use the tutoring waiver. This is if you have an exception that tutoring with GEAR Up funds is not necessary or not needed at this high school, because it usually means it's already met by some other organization or grant or something like that, that there's just not a need. There's not a place that you need to spend GEAR Up funds, so you would document that with a tutoring waiver. Just some ideal work plan basics. These are things that, if you remember, we did talk about this last summer and we spent some time, but it's something I just wanted to go back and cover, is the work plan development team. Sometimes the easiest thing is just for a site coordinator and project director just to meet and just to get this done, but that doesn't necessarily yield the best plan. It also doesn't yield the buy-in and support. As we talked about sustainability earlier, it doesn't give you that sustainability if you're not going to involve a lot of these other people that are listed here from the very beginning. So if you want their help and you want their support throughout the year, then get them in on the planning process in the very beginning. So this would include your school and district administrators, counselors, teachers, collaborative partners, people on your steering committees, people from fiscal office, people from your nonprofits, individuals from post-secondary institutions around you that you work with, and that sort of thing. And these people may or may not meet at the same time to work with you on the work plan. Some sites have determined that first they kind of want to start on the work plan and put together a draft and then send it out to some of these people and get their ideas and suggestions. You can determine how that works best, but I certainly would recommend that you use this team approach in order to build it. Next year, of course, you will be serving your high school freshmen and seniors. And I know that as much as many of you have enjoyed working with middle school students, it will be nice to have everybody in one place, cut down on travel and that sort of thing, and cut down on the number of teachers and administrators and people like that you have to work through to have access to students. So it's both a good and a bad thing. We've also enjoyed working with younger students and their excitement and things like that too. The next thing is integrated programming. We want this to be part of a comprehensive and collaborative approach. So part of the reason that we ask that you would have a work plan development team like this is you may find out from school counselors or administrators or someone at the central office that something very similar to one of these requirements is already part of their plan, or a principal or director of schools may tell you what they would like to have or what they need to meet their goals for professional development, and you can use GEAR Up funds for that. You'll find out from your school principal what their ACT score goal is next year and things that they may already have in place, so you can realize what kind of supplemental information you can do to raise ACT scores. So what we don't want GEAR Up to be is just a program at the school. We want it to be the program that allows you to put everything else and all these other pieces and opportunities and services that so many schools are able to provide and support, that you're able to put it together through GEAR Up, that it's stitched that way. So you don't have a teacher that feels like they're just doing this for GEAR Up, that they're just doing this for you, or a counselor that feels like this is just a GEAR Up thing, but it's much bigger than that. And then lastly is sustainability. How important this is, and again, sustainability is a part of the plan, the collaborative plan that we're going to talk about here in a second. But one of the things that we realized during Gear Up 2.0 is that we can't wait till year 6 or 7 of this grant and then figure out what do we need to do to make sure that Gear Up and the work that you've done continues after Gear Up funding, that it will work best, especially this year when we're moving from middle school to high school, that we start thinking about right now, even if you haven't even before, because I know a lot of you have, start to think about what's worked really well in the middle schools. What has Gear Up done this year with 8th graders that you feel like is possible to sustain, and how will that be sustained? And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. The required services chart has 4 different areas. That's funny. I wrote 4 different areas, and there's 3 listed there. There are 3. The first section is the student and family section, so it's really one that's together. And you'll remember that it's broken down by the 6 R's that we discussed earlier. That's the bulk of the required services chart. The next section, and it's a much smaller section, is the educator professional development section. And then the last one is grant implementation activities. This includes things like regional meetings and maps and compass and cars and going to INSEP and things like that are not necessarily things that are involved with students or families or educators, but just things that you have to do and reports and things on a regular basis. The next thing I would mention about the required services chart is it outlines the minimum Gear Up Tennessee required services. What I've seen this year and seen for many years in the past, it often really represents a small amount of the work that you all do. It's minimum requirements. It does not limit what you can do. And so for so many people, the required services chart may end up being 25% or 40% of the actual work and the service that they implement. But remember, it's just the minimum. So what we expect on the work plan is that minimum, at least, where it details that we're meeting all of those requirements. Again, required services mean that we must provide it, enhance it, or support it in some way. Finally, the goal is to use data to ensure that the right services are being offered to the right students. This is especially true as our students are getting older, as they start to figure out what colleges they want to go to, what types of careers that they're interested in. We know that all of our students are very unique and they're very different. They have different needs, they have different abilities, they have different skill sets. We do quite a bit of testing and looking at surveys and things like that. You have your college planning sessions. The goal of all this is to make sure that we're providing the right service, the right intervention to the right student, rather than just kind of using a shotgun approach and doing one thing for everybody, because we know in the end that's not going to yield the best result. The collaborative work plan itself has 7 different sections. The collaborative contact information is the first section. So this is when you just give us the contact information for different district personnel, your finance officers, the directors of schools, the site coordinators and project directors, and those sorts of things. Next section is where you also list that contact information for each high school that you're going to be serving next year. Then there's a section about the adequacy of facilities and equipment. There's 2 things that you'll do in this part. One is it's our way of making certain that the office space that you have, the equipment that you have access to, where you're going to meet with students, that is adequate. So we can see from our end, if it's not, what do we need to do to make sure that you've got a great area to work in and be successful. The second thing that we want you to list in that thing is specifically if there's equipment that Gear Up funds have been used to purchase, that you would include that in that section. Grant implementation activities. This section provides you an opportunity to articulate your plan to fulfill the grant implementation activities. These are the ones that we talked about just a second ago, the regional meetings and INSEP and things like that you would be a part of. Sustainability plan. This is the one that I had to go back and send the collaborative work plan out for yesterday because I wanted to make sure it was included. This section serves as a guide to develop and document the Gear Up services that will persist without Gear Up funding. So for this year in particular, and we'll talk about the sustainability plan here in just a minute, but for this particular year, what we're looking at is in the middle school, in 8th grade, what are some Gear Up services that have occurred this year that you feel like and hope will continue next year without Gear Up being present in the middle school? And this is a key time to do this. It's going to be really different when we're in the high schools and we're moving from 9th grade to 10th grade or 10th grade to 11th grade. But for this particular year, when Gear Up is moving out of these schools, then I think this sustainability plan is so important. Next is the collaborative budget. This section allows you to outline a budget for year 2 implementation, not for just a school, but for your entire collaborative. For some of you, this may be just one school, but for several of you, you may be in multiple high schools. That would be a part of this budget. Again, this section itemizes how this will be done, and then there's also a part of, again, of the work plan development guide that addresses the collaborative budget and how that section would work, because your collaborative budget also will include your match budget in there, the 40% match. And then the last is the signature page, where this will be signed by the project director and the director of schools. The sustainability plan. This is in your collaborative budget. Your collaborative work plan. It's also in the work plan development guide. What we're asking you to do, again, and this is something that, again, we want you to do with your team. We don't want just a site coordinator to do this or just a project director to work on this. But again, work on this with a team of people. And what we're asking you, what we're asking you to do is to think about what has worked really well in 8th grade for these Gear Up middle schools. If you think about what's been most impactful, what are the things that's really made a difference, that's changed some of the things that they're doing there. And then next, we would ask you to just outline here as you think about how could that be sustained. Is it something that requires certain resources, a financial resource? Often we find that what it requires is time. So is there a person or are there people that can share that responsibility to make sure that this is something that would continue next year? In the PowerPoint, I think there's 5 blocks there for sustainability. I think, and actually the collaborative work plan for sustainability, there may be 10 blocks or something like that. What I would ask you to do is not list 30 things that you think are going to continue, because we know that realistically that's not possible. Make this a very realistic sustainability plan. Think about those small number of things that it really is realistic that could continue, and then talk to those individuals that you feel like or have already said, this is something I want to see happen next year. This may be where you talk to the middle school principal or the school counselor or those teachers that have just kind of been those Gear Up heroes this year that have kind of been partnering along with you in some of the activities, and ask them what you could do this year to help them continue that type of thing. What are some resources that you could provide them or something like that, so that work will continue. The school work plan. So you'll have one school work plan for each direct service school. So this will be for each high school. You'll have a school work plan. This is an area that last year when you worked on this during the summer, some of you had many school work plans to do because you had to turn in one for every single middle school you worked with. So this is an area that you will have much less paperwork this year for many of you. When developing your school work plans, you should include activities and services that, number one, are required that are in the required services chart. Make sure that they are services that meet Gear Up Tennessee goals and objectives, and also meet the Gear Up Tennessee performance measures. If you're not familiar with those performance measures, the performance measures are in the collaborative work plan. They are also in the work plan development guide. You will include things in the school work plan that will be sponsored by the Gear Up Tennessee Central Office and will be used to satisfy Gear Up Tennessee matching requirements as well. Most people, when they put together their school work plan, I think this is kind of the easiest way to follow it. When you put together your school work plan, they use the required services chart and are just kind of start at the top of the required services chart and go down the list and include those in the school work plan. Then add anything that's also going to be part of your match, services and events that are going to be a part of your match next year. And then after that, start kind of thinking outside the box. Remember that the required services activities do not limit you. They list minimums. So after that, those things that you probably already thought about this year that you want to make sure that happen again next year, or new ideas that you have for next year, then figure out where they will follow best and put those in the school work plan as well. Remember that these activities will include the student, family, and professional development sections that you will have there laid out in the school work plan, that those will be separate sections that you will complete. An example of a school work plan is on this slide. This is the activities for student and family, and then this slide is showing the template that you will use in the school work plan for professional development activities. All right, next is the timeline. This is something that people always ask about up front. So when are these things due? One of the reasons that we rushed right after INSEP to be able to have this webinar and to get these different templates to you all is because we want to give you as much time as possible to work on it. We realized, again, that didn't happen over the summer, that you didn't have as much time. A lot of y'all put together the rough drafts during the 1 week meeting that we had and then finalized it after that. Typically, this is the amount of time and the time frame that we will use. So what we're asking is that your rough drafts will be due April 22nd, and that should give you plenty of time to meet with the different people in the work plan development team. These rough drafts do not need to be signed by anyone. And what often happens is you'll submit these, they will be reviewed by the central office, and sometimes we'll have feedback that we'll provide that maybe you missed one of the requirements, or there's something that looks like it may cost more than it should have, or something like that, or you're over the limit amount of money that you can spend on a certain line item. Those are things that we would provide feedback to you, and then the final version would be due to us May 17th. One thing that I would add, so even though the April 22nd deadline is the draft, all of the required services need to be included in that draft. There may be some other things that you all are still thinking about that you still want to add that are not included in that draft, and that's okay. But all of those minimum requirements should be met in that draft. So when we're reviewing it, so when we're looking at it over that period of time, we're going through that. And then the final version, May 17th. The reason we've set that up is we know that after that, sometimes it's harder to get some of the signatures once you have graduations and things like that. So we want to do that before then. And as you know, these actually start June 1 for your next award year. All right, next is a couple things that are new to year 2. First, I think what I want to do is let me go ahead and I'm going to get out of this and actually go into the required services chart, because there are a couple things that I just want to go through specifically. I'm not going to go through each one. Okay, so this slide is showing you the required services chart. This is the one that I sent out yesterday. I'm not going to go through each one, but I just want to talk through a couple of them that are very specific and that we've had a couple of changes to, and then I'll go back to the PowerPoint and the webinar as well. I think as you all have probably already looked at the required services chart for next year, most of them probably do look very familiar, look similar to things that you've been working through this year. One of the things that I will address is the academic progress monitoring, and then there's also one that's attendance monitoring. One thing that we're going to do next year, there'll be a block in Compass, a checkbox, so you can identify in Compass every student that is at risk for either of these reasons. This is not something that we're going to check the box, that we're going to use data for, but we're asking you to check the box next year for those students that are at risk, so then at some point you can meet those students with the needs and support and services that they need based upon why they're in academic progress monitoring, why they're in attendance monitoring, or maybe you have some people because of other issues that you just want to make sure they get some special attention, whether it's tutoring or mentoring or some type of extra service or something like that that you're doing. So that's one thing that will be new and will be different next year. Next is your summer program. So this coming year, even though I think we included this on the Gear Up 3.0 year 1, we included summer activities because we kind of wanted to give you the heads up and know that it was going to occur. But of course, this summer is our first summer. So there's a couple of things, and there's a PowerPoint that will talk about this, but there's 3 things primarily that you will be doing this summer. One is your own academic enrichment program that will occur. And again, I'm going to talk more about these, but I just wanted to mention them now as something that changes. So your summer academic program that will occur at your own high school or in your own school system. You will have the Youth Summit that you learned quite a bit about from Mary Nell and the Focus team when we were at INSEP. And then you will also have the INSEP conference that you will be attending in July. And then finally, we'll have summer melt work that we'll ask you to do over the summer as you have your seniors that are graduating the next couple of months, as they're making that final progression, that final step into college, that we'll do some things like using Signalvine and things like that over the summer to make sure and hope that they get to the colleges that you've been working with to get them to that place. You'll have an orientation, kind of like the kickoff that you did last year. I think actually for some of you, there was a kickoff in probably late April or May of last year, and then when the school year started, you did that orientation again. So for one thing, that will look a little bit different this year because you're doing it with your cohort group. You're doing it with those students who have already been a part of Gear Up for the most part for a year. So they're already familiar with Gear Up, but you're going to kind of tell them, reintroduce them and tell them how Gear Up is going to look different this year than last year. What are some events or activities or services that you're planning to do? And then each year you'll have a kickoff or an orientation with your seniors. And, of course, that's the first time that you've been working with them as Gear Up students. So that kickoff may look similar each year. One way that kickoff is going to look different, we're going to talk about this here in a minute, is you will have what we're going to call a senior guide that you can give all of those seniors during the kickoff. Again, we're going to talk about that here in a second, but that's one thing that we're thinking will be a great opportunity to do that at the kickoff or orientation that you have for your seniors. You have the same requirements for the campus visits, so you have 2 campus visits for your cohort group, 1 campus visit for your seniors as a requirement, but these should start to differ. So last year, all of us were taking every student to a TCAT or every student to a 4-year university, and that may occur some this year too, but as these students start to get older and they start to know what they want to do after high school, what kind of college they want to go to, what type of work they want to do, what they think they want to major in, you're starting to see some separations in their grades and test scores and things like that, then we will make differences what students we take to what schools, so that we're actually taking each student to the right place and where they feel like they want to be and where they'll fit in and that sort of thing. So this year may be another exploration year as you do some campus visits, but that would really change probably starting next year. Similar requirements for career exploration activities, College for TN. So one thing that I would just mention with the College for TN, it states that you will create an account. So this would be for new students. So if you have new 9th grade students that have not been a part of Gear Up or a part of your school before, they would first have to create an account. You also will have lots of students that you've been doing College for TN with this year. You won't have to create an account with them. You will just go to work. One of the things that I would mention here, so you will get a different lesson plan from College for TN, just like you had this year, but there's various interest inventories and assessments and things like that. I think I've seen some site coordinators, and Kevin and I have talked about this as he's kind of gone in to look at who's doing what, that some people have had, and maybe students have done this on their own, but they would go into assessments or they would go into inventories and they would take 3 or 4 of these at one time. The way they're set up is for our students in particular, so in 1 year they would take 1 survey and they would take 1 assessment. The next year they would take a survey and assessment about college and career exploration activities and things like that, so that each year they can kind of track what changes have been made in their thinking about what they want to do and where they want to do it, as opposed to just taking them all at once, and then the next year they've already taken them all. So if they're doing anything, they're having to take the same ones again. So that's the way that should work. You'll have newsletters that will go out again. Again, you'll have the mentoring requirement. The mentoring requirement, as you see there, it's a requirement for 25% of your students as is the target. And we've talked about this a lot. You will decide why students should be mentoring and what students need to be mentored and that sort of thing. So we want to identify those students. We'll ask you to. We have so many different types of mentoring programs and structures that we've seen been very successful across the state. If you have questions or feedback about that, you can definitely ask us. But there's just so many different models that have worked really well in mentoring. Last year we had a newsletter or letter that we sent out to parents that told them a little bit about Gear Up and told them a little about what you're going to be doing with their students for the next couple of years. And I think we actually called it a packet. Well, this year we actually will have a welcome letter and a packet of information that we're going to send to parents that's going to hopefully kind of ease some of that transition and that worry and concern that they may have, because this is a big year for students. It's a big year for parents when they're going from 8th to 9th grade. They're going into a new school. They know how much more important grades and testing and things like that are. So we will have a packet of information that we're going to send to you, and then you can edit it and change it the way you want to, personalize it, and it will go out to all of your parents. We'll have college planning sessions this year just like we have in the past. But I think what you will see with college planning sessions, by doing them each year, that we hope that our kids, their thoughts and what they're considering as they're going on these campus visits, as they're doing College for TN work, then they will start to really get to where they can kind of nail in exactly what they want to do. So even though these college plannings will look the same, the forms will be very similar, the conversations will be very different each year as these students mature and get older. The 21st Century Scholars. So first of all, you'll have your 9th grade students, your cohort, that have already received a 21st Century Scholar certificate. If they've already received one, it should be marked for you in Compass. If they've already received their certificate, they don't need to receive a second one. They just need to receive one for the entire grant. But you will have new students that will come in in ninth grade. They would need to receive a certificate. You also, starting this year, all of your seniors need to receive a 21st Century Scholar Certificate. We will print these at the central office. We will have them for you. And for your seniors, what we're going to suggest is that this certificate will go in the senior guide. So when you give them the senior guide, they will receive their certificate at the same time. Then we have the Youth Summit. So this is now this requirement is talking about the Youth Summit for year 2020, so for next summer. But it will be very similar. So after you experience the Youth Summer for this year, then you will be looking at the next one. We have parent and family services just like we have this year, but again, very different, just like some of the services are different for the students because we know that they're at a different place because their kids are at a different place now. The senior guides, and I'm going to go back and address this in the PowerPoint in just a minute, but the senior guide is how we're going to, a lot of the events and activities and services that we do with seniors are very transactional. Things such as completing applications for colleges, completing scholarship applications, completing the Tennessee Promise, completing FAFSAs. What we found over the years is there's kind of a lot of one-pagers, a lot of sheets that we've given kids during their senior year. So this is a way to have it all in one place, that they're responsible for it. You can choose if you're going to let them take it home or you want to leave it at the school. That's up to you. But everything is going to be in one place. So when you meet with them as a group, you can say, get out your senior guide and turn to page 22. If you're meeting with them one-on-one during that college planning session and they want to talk about college for teen, or they want to talk about careers, or they want to talk about how can I afford college, then you can say, turn to page 46 and let's start going through some of these things. So we feel like this is going to be a great resource for you to use, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that here in a minute. We're going to continue to use text messaging with our seniors just like we have this year, which on your part there will be both to do quick messages and send those messages out that you want to personally, and then we'll also have messages that will come out from the central office. So we'll just need to make sure that those students' phone numbers are in the system. We'll do Tennessee Promise workshops, we'll do FAFSA workshops, and offer community service opportunities just like we have in the past. College Application and Exploration Week, College Signing Day, so all those Path to College events will be, again, they will be requirements for both the ninth graders and for the seniors. You'll have the High School to College Transition Workshop, just like you do this year for your seniors. That will be the case next year. We talked about some summer melt work that you'll be doing. Some of that summer melt work may look like texting. It may be visiting students as they're going to colleges, as they're going to orientations, as they're having challenges with financial aid and things like that, but just helping to address those issues that we know that we lose 15 to 25% of our students that when they graduate in May tell you and state, I'm going to college and this is where I'm going, but on the day of, they don't actually show up for a lot of these different reasons that we want to try to work on that, so that changes. Then you have your professional development. So one would be your Gear Up Tennessee orientation. So this is your chance to tell all the educators in your high school about Gear Up, what we're trying to do, and then specifically what you're planning to do during the next year. What is some of those events and activities and services that are on your list, that are part of your work plan? We have 2 pre-approved professional development activities for educators. One of these is going to be a FAFSA workshop, and one of them is going to be a sustainability workshop. We'll go into a lot more about planning about these both today and then later as well. But what we want each school to do is put together what we call a FAFSA team of individuals. Your role as site coordinator for a reason is called a coordinator, not the one who's supposed to necessarily implement and do all the work. This is how we create that college-going culture. This is how we have the sustainability. So what we're going to ask you to do with FAFSAs next year is put together a FAFSA team. This could be a team that would include administrators. It could include teachers. It could include counselors. It could include people from local nonprofits. Some sites that includes like local accountants. It could include FAFSA folks or financial aid people from different post-secondary institutions to put together a FAFSA team, and then you all would work out your FAFSA plan of how to complete FAFSAs and how to do so in a very efficient manner. Next is the sustainability workshop. So earlier I talked about sustainability for this year. So we're going to ask you to do the same thing next year as you're working on that work plan. So when you're transitioning with your cohort from 9th to 10th grade, meeting with those people and look at what we want them to sustain from the 9th grade cohort year. And then finally in this section is travel to NCEP We have one upcoming conference in July, and then the February NCEP conferences. One thing I will mention about this required services chart, I think what I've found over the years is most people will concentrate on those first 4 columns, the actual activity, who is supposed to be served by, where it says 9th and 12th grade year, and then the date that it's supposed to be completed by. I realize the writing is small, but what a lot of people overlook is where it has the comments and clarification sections. So many times when people will later come back to me and say, I have a question about this, or can we do this, or is this allowable, or exactly what you all mean by this requirement, often the answer to that is in the comments and clarification section. So please take some time and read that section as well for all of these requirements. And then finally is the grant implementation activities. All of these look very familiar because I don't think any of these have changed from this year. We have the one change that occurred a couple of months ago with you have a few things, the completed activity report and the compass car that is now due on the 10th of the month instead of the 15th like all of the other items are. But everything else there is identical. Your steering committee meetings, the contact information that you will turn in to us, and that sort of thing is identical to this year. And then finally, this is the last page of kind of those grant implementation activities that include the APR. Thank you all for turning those in yesterday. It was been very exciting to read through some of those, and we'll read through some of your accomplishments and things like that, as well as reading through some challenges and obstacles and things that we have to work on for the next couple of years going forward. We'll have a kickoff in August, just like we did last year. That's something that we'll do each year, that we'll ask the project director and site coordinators to come into Nashville for a day for a kickoff event. You'll collect seniors' phone numbers again. We will have a fiscal visit. I think if Doug hasn't already, he will be reaching out to every site about a fiscal visit over the next 2 months. And then there'll also be a programmatic site visit as well, just to kind of look at what we're doing and how we might change or alter some things to help you continue to work on some of your goals and objectives. All right, I think some of these changes now I've kind of already gone through, but I will here as well. So these are just talking about some of the changes from last year. The senior guide is the first one. I've talked quite a bit about it. Some of y'all may have gone to the session at NCEP at Gariep, Arizona, where they had what they called the launch guide. If you're not familiar with it, excuse me. If you're not familiar with it, then here's a website link that will take you to their launch guide. So we're putting together a Tennessee version of this. So ours will not look exactly like it because it'll include information about the Tennessee Promise and the Hope and things like that. But it'll give you a very good idea. So as you're looking at your work plan, I think it's important that you know that you'll have this senior guide. So as you're looking at service and activities and things that you're going to do with your seniors, think about how you would use this guide when you're having a FAFSA workshop, when you're helping students plan for college, when you're talking about college and career exploration. This guide is going to be something that students are going to have in their hands that you can help them and facilitate kind of walking through each step of the process. So like, again, some of the one-pagers and things that you had to pull out throughout the year for each one, you will have in one place. And this may be something that throughout the year, if you see something that's not in there, definitely please let one of us know, as we may edit the guide each year and make changes and things like that. Summer activities, I think I went through each one of these already. So we've got the Youth Summit coming up this year, June 12th to the 14th at Austin Peay. Summer enrichment programs, I think we're going to talk about this some at regional meetings coming up. And I know one-on-one we've already discussed this a lot. But here are some examples of different types of summer enrichment programs that we've seen in the past, especially as we're talking about this particular year students are transitioning from middle school to high school. But they often will also include like STEM camps and CTE camps and campus visits and doing career exploration. They have to be academic in nature, but at the same time, we all know to get students to participate in things during the summer, they also have to be very unique. They have to be fun. They have to be exciting. They don't want to just go to another school day. So definitely talk to your regional coordinator. If you have questions about these, discuss them at regional meetings and find out what everyone else may be doing and get some ideas and things. And then lastly, the summer melt work that we'll do that I mentioned would involve texting, encouraging summer bridge program that a lot of our post-secondary institutions offer, providing campus visits for those students that are still deciding between this school or that school. And then some people offer different types of student success workshops. So for those students that definitely are going to college during the summer, they know where they're going and what they're doing, but some things that we can provide to make sure that once they get there that they will succeed, whether it's about test taking or note taking or understanding the different support services at their institutions or something. A couple other miscellaneous changes for this year. The first one is, for this year, there's been an $8 limit for meals, except for when you're on campus. Going into next year, the limit is now $10 that you can use to pay for with Gear Up funds. The next thing, and the second and third one here kind of go together, is the completion timelines for Tennessee Promise registration and FAFSA completion. And then also we talked about the development of FAFSA completion plans for each site. So one of the things that we've seen this year, first of all, is just pause and say your FAFSA rates have been so amazing and very impressive, and it shows all the work that you've done. As you know, Tennessee has either led the country or been number 2 in the country in FAFSA completion for the last 4 or 5 years, which just says a lot about the work that you all have done in Gear Up, and we know how much work that is. But at the same time, it takes a large chunk of your day, of your weeks, of your months to complete. So one of the things that we're working on, and I've sent all of y'all the link to the FAFSA survey. We put together different types of strategies from our offices. So what we want to do is work with each team over the next couple of months to put together a FAFSA plan. Part of that would incorporate that FAFSA team that you're going to have at your school. And we'll have, so instead of, in some schools and sites, even though you had been working as site coordinators and as administrators, had been working on FAFSAs for a long time, we found that by early to mid-January in a lot of our schools and school systems, we still had FAFSA rates that were in the 40s and 50%. And it meant a lot of things were happening in that last couple of weeks. That was just really a stressful time for everyone. So we're going to have some dates and some cutoffs, some goals, targets for FAFSA completion as well as for Tennessee Promise registration much earlier, and try to get those things, for the most part, like FAFSA, completed by mid-December is our hope, and what's going to be part of our strategy for this year and moving forward. Another thing that's going to be different this year is we're going to collect information about TRIO programs and services at your high schools. So if you have Upward Bound or Educational Talent Search programs, this is a form that we'll provide you that you won't have to worry about. But we want to find out what programs you have at your schools, what students are served, and then what we can serve the same students in Gear Up as they're serving in Upward Bound or Talent Search, because as you know, with our model, we're serving every 9th grade student. We're serving every senior, and they can serve those same students as well. But what we can't do is we can't count the same service. So if you're taking all of your students using a Gear Up plan trip, using Gear Up funds, and you're taking a trip with all of these students to UT Knoxville, well, your Educational Talent Search program cannot also count that same trip. So the same would be true. Let's say there's an Upward Bound program at your school, and they have 10 students, and they take them all to a trip to Nashville State. You can't count that same service. Again, you're counting the same students that they're being served throughout the year, but we can't count the service twice. Last year, as far as changes, it's a 21st Century Scholarship. Again, the difference is that this year it will go to both cohort students that have never received it before, and then it will also go to the seniors this year as well. And we're suggesting you just put that, we'll have like a pocket in the senior guide, and it will go into that pocket. A couple of reminders. One is phone numbers, and I think we've already talked about this a little bit when we talked about Junior Planning Night coming up at your school. That Junior Planning Night is not a cohort, is not necessarily a Gear Up activity because you're working with seniors, but it is a great way for you to start to be involved, for you to be introduced to these students, for them to know who you are. So if there's a way for you to be involved in that college planning night for juniors, just to take 2 or 3 minutes and introduce yourselves to them, that would be great. It's also a great way for you to go ahead and start collecting the phone numbers of those rising seniors so that you can use those in the very beginning, either during the summer or as school starts in August. You already have those phone numbers, and we can put them in our system over the summer and start to work with texting and using Signalvine in that way. All right, that is it. I apologize it went so long, but I hope it's been thorough and answered questions that you may have. If it has not, please feel free to put any question in the Q&A section or into the chat, or if you want to be unmuted, let us know that as well, and we would be happy to do that. What questions do you have? Any questions? I'm not sure if I was that thorough or you were just ready for me to stop. All right, so I've received one question that says, can events from Gear Up count for, wait, did it change?
Title I events.
Thank you. Can it count for Title I events? Yes, it can. But so sometimes what we get into those types of things is when something is paid for by Title I, then you count that as match. But as far as counting the service where it's a service that both Gear Up is participating in and Gear Up and Title I funds are being used, you can't count that service. You just couldn't count the amount that Title I funds has been used as match. Next question.
There's not one.
There's not one. All right. Any other questions that you all have? And I'm sure that things may hit you later. Please feel free to reach out to me or reach out to Shayla by phone, by text, by email, and we will answer it. And if it seems like it's a question that a lot of people may have, then we'll answer it to everyone at one time.
Can you remind us of the date, the deadline for the rough draft, and also for the plan to be signed? Do you want to scroll back on them? Yeah.
All right, I was asked a question about the timeline. So the draft work plan, those are due. So by draft work plan, that would mean the collaborative plan that includes your budget, as well as the school work plans for each high school. Those draft plans are due by April 22nd, and the final version of the work plans that would be the work plans after they've kind of gone back and forth with the central office. You will receive final word from us after you submit your draft saying this is great, go ahead and have them signed. Those are due on May 17th.
Do you have any other dates for events or trainings this summer? Is there a date for the kickoff?
There is not a date for the kickoff, but it is something that's on our list. We are actually starting to go ahead and start to plan and work for that event. So expect within the next month or so that we will be able to provide you a date and location for that. As far as the summer, the only date, so you'll have the Youth Summit, you'll have the INSEP conference in San Francisco. What you do as far as your own academic program over the summer, you will define the dates for that. For some people, that's a 2 or 3 day event. For some people, it's month long, so that is up to you. And then Summer Melt works the same way. We know that most of our site coordinators are in 11-month positions, so that usually means that they're splitting work in a couple of weeks in June and a couple of weeks in July, which is certainly fine. So you will decide how much Summer Melt you'll be able to do based upon your schedule, and of course how many students you serve varies a lot from site to site. Other questions or concerns or thoughts? All right, I know everyone has lots more to do, so I'll go ahead and close this out. Again, this will be recorded, and I will actually be gone next week, so Mary Nell will send out the link to the webinar as well as the website link to all of these documents that will be posted on our website. Again, if you have any more questions or things that you didn't think about now, feel free to always reach out to me or Shayla, either one, and we will get back to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.